Energy is inherently a part of everything we do in our lives, but one of the least understood things.
I can see a future where there is limitless and free energy. And that's a pretty beautiful world to live in.
Welcome back to another episode of Power to the People. John, today we're going to go even deeper on energy. But the coolest part is we're going to be hitting different forms of energy, geothermal, linear generators, wind, a lot of different topics. But before we kind of dive into that, I actually wanted to go a little bit deeper on what's your approach to energy, and not energy as like an asset, as something that we use on the grid, but like, how do you see energy in the world around us? I want to start with that one because I think there's a misunderstanding around, or not misunderstanding, a lack of, I guess, perspective on how energy is in the world around us.
Well, that's a big question. I mean, I see energy as, I mean, it's the thing that makes stuff happen. It's kind of this magical, undefinable thing that neither created nor destroyed, changes from one form to another. Powers everything from the movement of the planets to the mitochondria in our cells, and it kind of ties everything together from the largest scale to the smallest scale.
Do you think it can be shifted around? Because I wonder about that sometimes. Like, I obviously, like, when I was a kid, it was like, oh my gosh, Star Wars, that'd be so cool. But at the same time, I saw this video when I was in high school, and this was before AI and all the crazy like fake videos and stuff. So I was like, all right, this might be legit. But it was essentially this guy that would he was in Eastern Asia, and he was like, hey, I'm gonna try and like strike this person, and it literally couldn't touch him. And there was the explanation around why is the person had control of the energy around them. And I know that's a little bit out there, but what it did for me was it kind of opened my mind to like the what ifs. And I think that part of this energy conversation is diving into the what ifs and thinking about the possibilities, because we are still very early, weirdly, in the full understanding of the power of energy. And so I just wanted to preface it with that, because I think it's like a fascinating thing that we don't understand, and there's so many different perspectives, but I think it also frames a conversation, because some of the energy solutions here are seemingly kind of like, I don't know how to best put it besides just truly incredible, and something that we couldn't actually imagine even 10 years ago. It was like, that's an energy source? No way. That's incredible. And it just slowly develops and keeps going. So I just find that fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of different forms of energy that we either are, or we can tap into, or I have a little personal experience with something similar, but not nearly as cool, I would say. But back in grad school, I was using a pH probe a lot to like make waters of different chemistries and different pHs, and I had a particularly sensitive one day, and I was trying to get my readings to stabilize, and I was like reaching for the probe, to like adjust the thing, just a little stir bar inside of it. And I noticed after a while that every time I would reach for the probe, the reading would flicker a little bit. And a pH probe, if you don't know, is a very like sensitive electrochemical like meter, basically. So it detects very small fluctuations in positive and negatively charged, like ions, hydrogen in the water. And it was, contained in a beaker. Like I tried like blowing on it, nothing happened. It was only when I was moving back and forth, like, with my hand, that it like caused that little doop, like that last digit on the probe to flicker. So I was like, is this my
That's
electric
actually
field?
incredible.
Like, yeah.
Wow.
But, I mean, we can measure that kind of stuff, with, like EKGs, brain scan, kind of stuff. So It's not totally woo woo, but it was an interesting thing to be like, I'm like influencing this, like with this probe, just by kind of moving around it. Yeah.
I think it's a reminder of the power that we do have, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible. I remember
It's
there was
all
like
all
this
connected.
there was this study they did, again, high school kind of research. I went down a rabbit hole for sure. Um, but are you familiar with the rice experiment where they kind of tested two different rices in containers? So this is another thing where I was like, it just kind of opened my mind of like the world, we don't understand it. Whether it's true or not didn't matter. It was just like, wow, this is very interesting. Basically, this person cooked rice in in the exact same way, put it in two different containers, put them on different sides of the same room but controlled, and went over for a week or for a month, and went to one container and said a very positive word and the other container and said a very negative word. And by the end of the month, the positive one was still in perfectly edible form, and the other one went completely moldy and gross. And yeah, who knows if it was real, but to me it was like, okay, what we do, what we say, all those things do have power. And so when you think about that in the broader perspective, all of the things that are kind of around us, whether that be the wind, the water, the nuclear energy around us, all of that kind of stuff is power, and it's how we harness it, how we use it, how we control it, that I think is um it's really a new frontier. And that's why I really am fascinated by this conversation. So let's dive into kind of the first topic that you kind of brought up here, which I believe is around green hydrogen, but let me know.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, I thought, sorry, my cat is trying to make this all about her. Get your claws out of there. Go on. Right. So last time we talked about some of the cool stuff that you can do with hydrogen, and making materials, using it as a fuel, using it as energy storage, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought we'd just dive a little bit more into that as part of this kind of discussion on, like, there's a lot of different types of energy we can tap into out there, like all kinds of different processes and ways to harness, energy in different forms. So starting with the basics, if you recall from, high school chemistry, hydrogen is the simplest, most abundant element in the universe. It's just a single proton and a single electron. Um, Although it's usually found, for stability's sake, in dihydrogen form, so that's two hydrogen atoms together, so it's usually H2. And you add an O onto that and you get water. But anyway, so along with carbon and oxygen, hydrogen is one of the, like, foundational essential building blocks for complex hydrocarbons, or hydrocarbons in general. I mean, hydrogen, carbon, hydrocarbon, it's right there in the name. Um, so you really can't have life as we know it without this. And so it's uh, yeah, it's foundational for a lot of very interesting and powerful molecules. And so that's why it can be used as a building block for us to create, like plastics or biofuels or, ammonia or, whatever, is because it's so foundational to so much of chemistry.
Is it its
Um,
foundational nature or its abundance or both? Because I do wonder about
yes.
that.
Yes. Yeah, it's both. So it's, I mean, it is extremely prevalent. It's the most, like, common, or, it's the most ubiquitous element in the universe. And so, that means that there's a lot of it about. But also, it plays these unique roles that cannot be um, imitated or duplicated by another element. It's just its size, its lightness, its reactivity, all of these things, kind of make it stand out, and yeah, so, and become very useful. So right now, reflecting that usefulness, there are large amounts of hydrogen that are used in various industrial processes today. So things like industrial heating, chemical synthesis, stuff like that. But basically, all of it comes from natural gas. So you can take natural gas, which is hydrocarbons, and you can kind of break off the hydrogens from that, and extract them, and then that's basically how we get most of our hydrogen today and historically. So, but that produces greenhouse gas emissions, obviously, and so that's not ideal. And there's a pretty big hurdle right now that we have to get over, to convert from that gray hydrogen, is what they call, what's the kind of the common stuff that's produced from natural gas, um, to green hydrogen, which is what we call hydrogen that's produced from renewable clean sources. So the big hurdle is the cost, because we've sunk so much time and money into extracting and working with natural gas that we have a lot of it, and we have the ability to work with it. And so it's very cheap for us to produce gray hydrogen, whereas green hydrogen, right now it takes a fair bit of power, and it takes water, and it takes time. So all of those things contribute to make it, right now, like roughly 2 to 3 times more expensive than gray hydrogen. So that's been a hurdle in the green hydrogen industry for sure. Although there's always progress being made in terms of new ways to produce it. So last time I mentioned solar panels that directly produce hydrogen. They take in sunlight and they kick out hydrogen. They have like a little water flow, that goes through them, and yeah, it's pretty incredible. And there's also what's called white or gold hydrogen, depending on what your source is. But it's geologic hydrogen, so it's hydrogen gas that's stored underground, and produced by natural processes. And unlike fossil fuels, as far as we can tell, the hydrogen that's produced underground is a result of an ongoing process. So it's not like a one-time thing like oil and coal and natural gas, where you have the initial input of biologic material, compress it, heat it, give it time, and it turns into fossil fuels. This is something that's produced by ongoing chemical reactions underground. So you tap a well for hydrogen, and you can keep pulling that out for years and years and years. And actually kind of a fairly sustainable way.
Well, and I know they mentioned that about fossil fuel, the fact like, oh, yes, we can keep drilling in this spot for years and years and years. Great. And we've mentioned a couple times that it's irreplaceable, that we'll eventually run out of it. It's finite. Technically, want to kind of correct it. It isn't finite. It does last forever, but you need millions and billions of years for that process to happen. And I think that was also the important point that I wanted to mention, is that like we're talking timelines here, not the actual ability for the Earth to create the material. It's like it's our frequency of using it, and then how long it takes to regenerate and use.
Yeah, although there are specific conditions that are needed to create fossil fuels. So you need a large amount of like you need like big shallow seas to sustain like a very abundant and constant phytoplankton population, essentially. And then you need to have the right conditions like on the seafloor to prevent them from decaying, essentially. So it's not like you just it's not like something that's happening all the time continuously, and you just have to wait. It's like there are specific pockets in time where the conditions are right to produce these things. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, it does speak to the viability of hydrogen, though, the fact that it's almost like an ongoing well of just fuel.
Yeah. I mean, compared to a traditional oil and gas well, those have they have a peak, and then it comes down very sharply, because that's like most of the pressure that pushes the oil and gas out has been released in that first little chunk of time. So they have very diminishing returns after a while. That's why they do things like enhanced oil recovery, where they will either like frack the existing well, or they'll pump like like steam or hot water or whatever down into the well to try to like get out that last bits of stuff. But then that takes more energy, which cuts into your energy budget for the overall process. And yeah, um, so it'd be great to have, you could tap one well and have it keep producing for 100 years or whatever. Especially because it's just hydrogen, and it's everywhere. It's in the air already. It's not some I mean, well, let me get back to this, because it turns out hydrogen is not actually a greenhouse gas in itself, but it does have an impact on the greenhouse gas effects of the planet. So it has an impact on the climate by reacting with hydroxyl radicals in the atmosphere. So that's an oxygen and a hydrogen and then a free electron, a free radical. Those are very reactive molecules, but you can imagine if you just have another hydrogen floating around, it'll grab that and become water. And hydroxyl radicals in the atmosphere, they're very good at degrading methane, which has a very high greenhouse gas potential. So, and methane, comes from human activities, but it also comes from, just natural processes like, oil seeps, gas seeps, that have been naturally occurring for forever, basically. So it basically if you put more hydrogen in the atmosphere, it decreases the ability of the atmosphere to degrade methane, which has an effect on the climate. It also lowers cloud albedo, so how reflective clouds are. So if you are reflecting less sunlight into space because your clouds are less shiny, basically, then the surface will heat up more. So studies have estimated that hydrogen has a global warming potential. That's just like a comparison against carbon dioxide, basically, of 11. So like 11 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So not something you want to be releasing into the atmosphere in large quantities, especially if we're also still releasing large quantities of methane into the atmosphere, which we are. So that introduces an additional challenge in terms of storage and transportation of hydrogen, whether that's green hydrogen or gray hydrogen. I mean, it's all hydrogen. It's just, the label is where you got that from. But yeah, so when thinking about like transitioning, from natural gas to hydrogen to like green hydrogen, you have to think about, well, how are we going to transport it? How are we going to store it? If we're going to keep doing like centralized production of this material, like if it's more distributed, then that, it's a little bit easier. You don't have to think about like big pipelines and stuff like that. But you can pump hydrogen through pipelines meant for like natural gas. But it can eventually damage the pipes. Hydrogen is so small that it can get in between the faults and the crystals of the metals of the pipes and cause like cracking and weakening, and can actually kind of escape out through metal, which it's kind of crazy to think about, but it's that small.
It's fascinating to think about like how like foundational, important, versatile hydrogen is, but also how, I don't want to say damaging it can be, but like it does have the opposite effect. Like it can cause a lot in the atmosphere. It can sneak through things. It's like it's good, both good and bad at the same time, which is fascinating.
Well, that's just the story of basically everything. It's got pros and it's got cons, and I think the smartest path forward with any of these things is to figure out which cons you can live with, which pros you can't. Like.
Yep. Do you think that we'd move into like a like just playing out a scenario here? Do you think we a lot of the discussion over the last like 10, 15 years, 20 years, even longer, has been around CO2? If this is 11 times worse, does it become a hydrogen problem? Like, is that let's just say this becomes the dominant energy. Like, let's just say that it does. Is that the problem that comes with this solution is like, oh, now we have a hydrogen problem?
Well, so the issue with combusting fossil fuels is excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. which is directly a greenhouse gas. So it's the normal use of fossil fuels that produces the greenhouse gas effect. Whereas with hydrogen, if you're actually using it, you're turning it back into water. So um, it would only be like if you have a leaky transportation system, if you have a leaky
Hmm.
storage system, or if you're just like venting it straight into the air and not using it, then it becomes a problem. But it in the course of normal use, if you're like able to safely transport and store and and combust it, or use it in a fuel cell, then there's no issue like that.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's definitely not a 1-to-1 in terms of like greenhouse gas impacts.
Yep.
Um, but it's still a powerful fuel. And you can combust it, or you can run it through a fuel cell. You can use it to power a car.
Mhm.
It's compared to a traditional gasoline powered car, a hydrogen fuel vehicle like the Toyota Mirai. Like that's kind of
Mhm.
been the only kind of commercially available one for quite some time. But they only require about half of the input energy to reach the same power output. So they're basically
Wow.
like twice as efficient as a traditional gasoline powered car, but still only like half the efficiency of an EV. So
Yeah.
it's this,
Well, I
it's
also
kind of this
remember like
spectrum.
I remember when I rode the bus a lot when I was younger, and I remember when hydrogen buses started coming out. And it was so, I mean, yes, it was in California, so fair, we were a little bit more progressive on that stuff, but I literally remember it being almost like the future because it was like this and a little white puff of smoke out the back, and I was like, that's so cool. It's so quiet. Um, it's I mean, it does have its application, that's for sure, but I think the infrastructure side is the hard one. It was like where do you find a hydrogen station? Not very many.
Yeah, yeah. It's and where is that hydrogen coming from too? Is it coming from natural gas? I mean, overall, it would still be cleaner than a
Hmm.
traditional fossil fuel powered vehicle. But if we're gonna go for like minimizing impacts, like you have to think very carefully about where your hydrogen is coming from.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so there are some. I think that green hydrogen in particular, it has a lot of potential, a lot of possibilities, um,
Hmm.
and it's just we have to think very very carefully and implement very carefully the infrastructure and the use cases that we want to see. So I think things that we can't get otherwise, things that we can't get with just batteries or whatever,
Hmm.
um planes, trains, boats.
Dare I say
uh
automobiles? Planes, trains, and automobiles.
Well, I mean, I think yeah, most automobile like passenger, kind of everything smaller than like a big truck, like which is
Hmm.
better for an EV, or like a EV is better suited for that.
Hmm.
It's really when you're getting into these cases where you need a large amount of power
Hmm.
with a low weight. Excuse me.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's that energy density that if that's what's important, then hydrogen, is probably your good go-to.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Um, but yeah, so you can, like I said, you can combust it, or you can run it through a fuel cell, or you can do a secret third option, which brings me to my next cool technology,
Hmm.
which is a linear generator. So you could potentially run hydrogen through this new type of engine. So if you're not familiar, which I don't blame you if you're not.
Yeah.
It's a very new technology, and it's really been pioneered by one company, Mainspring Energy. Um, Linear generators are basically a reinvention of the internal combustion engine,
Mm.
that maximize efficiency, that don't actually rely on combustion, and they operate under fairly low temperatures, so they minimize a lot of the pollution that comes out of it. And
Wow.
they can run on many, many different types of fuels. So essentially, the linear generator operates on the same principle as an internal combustion engine. You put some fuel in a chamber and then you compress it until you get a reaction. But with the linear generator, it's two pistons that go horizontally around a central reaction chamber, and they move in and out like that. And there's magnetic coils, and they're wrapped in copper wires. So as they move in and out based on that, that energy provided by the reaction chamber, they generate electricity. And they're just kind of just kind of floating on air, and they have they're suspended by the magnets, and they have little air cushions on either end, so it compresses and then goes back and boom, 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 boom. And they can modulate how fast or how slow the pistons come together to very precisely control the temperature to which the fuel in the center chamber gets combusted. Or they actually do it intentionally. They make it so it's just under combustion, so it's still releasing energy from breaking some of the chemical bonds, but it's not going through a full heat and oxidation reaction. So you really cut down on things like nitrous oxide emissions, and other stuff like that that's produced when you have like high temperatures and kind of uncontrolled chemical reactions.
I would also imagine it kind of helps in the not just the nitrous oxide side of it, but like other waste products. Like when you combust something, it will inevitably start to leave particles and stuff around the chamber that it's probably in. So I'd imagine there's a little bit of there's a cleanliness to the process too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, very, very low emissions from this stuff. And because it's not because it's very tunable, because they you can have this feedback between the generator, and a generator can also be a motor, or like you can generate power, and you can also like reverse that process and like use power outside to like control the movement of the piston. So you can very precisely control, like how fast and how much pressure is put on that fuel. So you can use a lot of different types of fuels. So you can use fuels that are available today, natural gas, propane, gasoline, biogas. You can also use fuels of the future, like hydrogen, all with exactly the same machine. So, and the way that they have their product in particular, I'm not doing like a big sales pitch, I promise. I just think it's a cool technology. The way that they do it is they use like AI controls to make that process, that in and out, very, very efficient and very adaptable to different types of fuels. So from a business owner perspective, or these things are probably a little too right now, probably a little too expensive and a little too specialized to be like great for residential stuff, but for utility and commercial applications, you buy this one machine and you're set, like for the foreseeable future in terms of fuel sourcing. And it can, be whatever's cheapest at the moment. You can switch it out, like on different days of the week. Like it's a really kind of incredible, adaptable technology. So yeah, that can.
Do you think that's also partially from magnets? Because it keeps coming up that, that idea of magnets powering most things. And I think we miss how much that actually powers everything we do. Like we play around with magnets a little bit and we grab stuff, but I don't think we see that is what's powering most of the things.
Yeah, well, it's they're an integral part of anything that really relies on electromagnetism, which because there's this weird deep relationship between electricity and magnetism. It's like you can if you have copper wires wrapped around something and you move it around a magnet, like that produces an electric field, electric current, and so I mean that's the foundation for an electric motor. It's the foundation for like any type of like turbine, so things
and
like
a compass.
And yeah. I mean, you're standing there with a little shard of magnetized material, and picking up on this huge electromagnetic field of the Earth. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
and if we've got electromagnetic fields in us, who knows,
Mhm.
what kind of interactions are happening there. We know that other animals can navigate vast distances just based on the electromagnetic fields of the Earth.
Mhm.
Whales, they can they kind of they count the stripes in the seafloor, basically, that have they'll be aligned north south one way, or like for a little bit, and then the poles of the Earth will flip, and so there'll be another stripe of the opposite orientation, and they'll flip back, and so there's kind of this, like, these stripes on the bottom of the seafloor that have different magnetic orientations, and whales can pick up on that and use it to navigate. Pretty wild stuff.
That's incredible. I live in a place where there's a lot of whales that migrate up in Washington, and like yeah, when you have that migrate, it's fascinating to see like they know exactly where to go. They do it at the same time of year, and it's not just oh let's go on a trip. It's like they're actually guided by something that's passed on through generations, and they use that Earth navigation essentially. It's incredible.
Yeah, yeah, it's electromagnetism and grandmothers. That's
Yeah,
Wales, the story of Wales.
yeah, yeah. That could be a whole other series: electromagnetism and grandmothers.
Yeah.
Outstanding.
So linear generators. They're with so this particular technology, it's very scalable. So you can
Mhm.
have it be, like, you can have one unit, or you can, link them up in parallel. So you can get, basically any amount of power you want out of it. It has no water demand, so it's
Huge.
yeah, you just put in your fuel and you get out energy and very, very little pollution. And they're about 45% efficient, which is
Wow.
much more efficient than an internal combustion engine, traditional one.
Well, I also find it interesting too that like you have this. I mean, you have this solution that I think will inevitably get smaller over time. Like, I mean, you mentioned that it's kind of for more commercial. It's not going to be work for the home. A little bit expensive at the moment, but um, computers used to be entire floors of buildings, and now we have them in our pocket. And so I think also knowing that time and efficiencies of scale do help in this. And so, like, evaluating a lot of these technologies, whether it be newer or a little bit older, but especially the newer ones, with the mindset that it's the worst it is right now. And this is already a really cool solution. So it's like, okay, now
Yeah,
let's see where it could go.
very true, very true. Yeah, there would definitely continue to be, technological developments, especially because all of this has been kind of pioneered by this one company so far. So
Mhm.
as that technology spreads, more people will be able to, sink their brains into it, and come up with some really cool applications, I'm sure. Um, yeah. So next on my list is geothermal energy,
Mm.
which I'm sure it's familiar to many people. That in California, that we've got the Geysers power plant, which is a geothermal power plant. I think it's the largest in the nation. But there's other countries, like some Scandinavian countries that have a lot of natural geothermal, and always have,
Hmm.
for as long as those people have been there.
Doesn't
And
Iceland run like 95% of their power off of geothermal or like
something like
98 or
that. Yeah, and they
something? Yeah,
also,
it's like
like,
some really high percentage.
keep their streets ice free,
Yeah.
using geothermal, which is, like, yeah, why not? If you've got the source right there.
Hmm.
But so in the past, it's been very location specific. Like, you have to be kind of sitting on a hotspot, to really get a
What is
lot.
it? If you can
What?
like
Oh,
define it for people, because I think for a lot of people
yeah.
they're like, "What is geothermal?" Like you can ride a thermal if you're in like if you're in Colorado and you want to do some stuff with a parachute, you can ride the thermals. Then there's geothermal. Like let's define it because I think it sounds very advanced.
Well, it's very simple. Actually, it's hot
Hmm.
earth geothermal.
Yep.
And it's there's literally, like, a whole world of energy just beneath our feet, and in the form of heat and the Earth's crust. And So most of that heat comes from the radioactive decay of radioactive elements in rocks. So you think about how much heat a nuclear power plant puts off. There's that kind of stuff going on in the Earth's crust all the time, because that's where the like the uranium and plutonium and all that stuff, that's where that naturally forms. So it's radioactive down there too. But when that happens and it's contained in rock, it just heats up the rock around it. So that's where a lot of that energy comes from. But it also comes from the orbit of the moon around the Earth and the orbit of the Earth around the sun, because those things cause the Earth's to kind of stretch and compress and stretch and compress. And if you take something that's hard and chunky like the Earth and you put this pressure on it, it's going to heat up. You could do that with a piece of metal. You could, like, if you bend it enough, then it will heat up in the middle. And so that, because that's basically that conversion of kinetic energy. Well, first gravitational energy to kinetic energy to thermal energy, and then you got a hot planet. So that's been great for us. It helps keep the magnetic field healthy and happy, by keeping things underground really hot and molten metal. So so there's a ton of heat down there, and from our human perspective, it's essentially infinite. It's essentially limitless. Like, I don't really foresee any future in which we'd like run out of geothermal energy. So, at least in any kind of reasonable form. So the trick then is like, well, first you have to find hotspots. So there's hotspots all around the globe. There's a lot of geothermal resources in like the western part of the United States, which is why California has that Geysers geothermal power plant. And that's just due to some quirks of geologic history of plate tectonics. The western half of the United States, the crust has been stretched by a bubble of like magma that's coming up underneath it as like the plates move, which is why Colorado's at such a high elevation. There's like stuff underneath pushing pushing it up, which means that like the crust is a little bit thinner, so it's easier to get to the hot stuff underneath.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
pretty
cool, because I mean, you study plate tectonics when you're in school, and you're like, okay, it's they come together, they go up, they go down, and then they subvert with each other. To think that it's just a bubble that's all going up, they never taught us that part. That's fascinating.
Yeah, so you've got like the main kind of plate for the United States, and then you've got we California on the coast, well, the coast of the United States. We've got another plate coming in from the ocean, and because it's cold from the water on top of it, it goes under the land plate. So it's more dense, it's colder, it goes under, and then it comes down here where it's really hot and it melts and it comes back up and pushes the crust up. So so we get stuff like earthquakes and Mount St. Helens and geothermal resources and great skiing in Aspen, all from the same all from the same process. So historically you needed to find hotspots like that, but with some newish technologies and new techniques, we can basically get at least a little bit of useful geothermal energy from just about anywhere. So we can use techniques that are similar to fracking for oil and gas, where you find like a nice warm patch of rock underground, and you pump water down there really, really hard, and it cracks the rock. And then you can pump water down and get steam out, and you can even use that for underground mining that's very, very low impact. So if you have hot water and you're running it through rock that's mineral rich, say it has a lot of lithium, like the Salton Sea, there's some very interesting geothermal mining potentials there. So that has a lot of lithium underground, which we can basically dissolve in hot water and then bring up to the surface and cool and extract it. And so we can, pull out tons of useful minerals from underground without digging a big pit, and going through the usual mining route, which I think is super cool. I'd love to see more of that. It's very low impact on the environment, very low impact on people too. It just seems like a smarter way to do it if we, if it's the right situation. But you can also use it for heat. That's kind of the most common thing. So you can, you find a patch of hot rock underground, you can use these, enhanced geothermal techniques to, to create steam basically from that hot rock and drive a turbine and generate electricity. So that's if you have like, like a fairly high temperature, but even like shallower, lower temperature spots, you can use those as a heat source for high efficiency heat pumps. So, which can be even, like you can do this for your house too. Like you can do it right now for your house. There's the people that do it. There's the technologies available. Basically, you sink pipes into the ground, maybe a dozen feet, 20 feet, pump water through that, pump air through that, some type of, media to carry the heat around, and you can run a heat pump off of that and heat your home, cool your home all year round. It's because it's a very stable temperature underground. It doesn't go through the day and night cycle of hot and cold, and even seasonal stuff doesn't affect it as much because there's this like limitless source of heat always coming up from underground. So yeah, so there, we can use this stuff, and we do today, but we can continue to to lean into this in the future. We use it all the way from utility scale power plants to heat and cool your home.
Wow.
So there's a ton of potential, especially in like I said, the western half of the United States, as the crust is coming up, melting and coming up, and so
that's a fun
so
one.
very very
Wow.
very cool stuff.
Geothermal is super cool.
Yeah.
Deepest I've ever gone on it, so this is great.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's kind of the kind of thing where you learn about it and you're like, why aren't we doing this more? Like it's right there. Like it's free energy right under our feet. Yeah, it's just it takes a little bit of work, a little bit of money, a little bit of imagination, and a little bit of breaking out of the status quo, which as we continue to do that, as we're kind of forced to do that by climate change and by peak oil, stuff like this, I think will rise in prominence. And I'm excited to see that. Especially if we can combine it with mining, because we're gonna need those minerals. Like we already need them. We're gonna increasingly need them. And if we can get them in a way that's very low impact on the environment and on human rights and stuff like that, like that's the direction I think we should be moving toward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So nearing the end here, but offshore wind is what I wanted to talk about next. So everybody knows, wind turbines, windmills, as some low information people call them. They're not windmills. Windmills are they're mills. That's for like grinding stuff. Like that's wind turbines produce electricity. And the thing about wind is you want to have as strong of wind as possible. So basically the amount of energy that you can produce with a wind turbine is exponentially related to the size of the turbine and the speed of the wind. So the bigger the better. Like you can do 100 small ones, or you can do one really big one, and you could probably get more power out of that one really big one.
Wow.
And so that's like we've our on shore or land-based wind turbines, the wind farms, like we've kind of maxed out the size that we can go there, and we haven't maxed out like the resource potential, but in terms of like the size of the wind turbines that we could build, we're limited by the size of like trucks and transportation things and the size of our roads mostly. Like if you've ever seen like a video of them trying to like drive part of a wind turbine down a road, like it's a whole thing.
I've driven by them before, and then you're like, it's a whole train. It's crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of it's kind of funny, but like the size of our wind turbines now are limited by the size of Roman chariots, because
Mm-hmm.
road, like the road standard was like, you drive a chariot or like a wagon, and those were built by the Romans, and so it became this very standard size for like, this is how wide your road is. And they had them in Europe and like the Mediterranean, and we kind of just borrowed that and brought it over here. That's why our train tracks are about that size.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're running into these issues of like, we can't build really big wind turbines because the roads are too narrow. So just funny little quirk of
Rome
history.
should have thought about that one. They should have
Yeah,
thought about
I
it.
know, I know. um, so one solution for that is you put them offshore, you put them in the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
and offshore wind has been mostly done like in places with a very shallow sea bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So like the East Coast, it has a big continental shelf, a very shallow sea for quite a ways, as compared to the Pacific, which drops off precipitously and is super deep. Um, and so we've done that we've done the shallow sea ones where they're actually embedded in the seafloor for stability. But in the last decade or two, we've been getting better and better at floating wind turbines. So they're literally floating on the surface. They can have like core wires that are connected to the seafloor, or they can just be built in such a way that they can move with the ocean and be stable, which is
Well,
kind of crazy if you think about it. It's this huge thing, like taller than the Statue of Liberty, with
mm-hmm.
moving things that's blowing in the wind and rocking on the ocean, and somehow it could still be stationary. Pretty incredible feat of engineering. But um, if you put them offshore and you put them in deep water, you can get the highest winds that we can basically we can potentially access. So that means huge turbines and huge amounts of power from the winds, and you can also sight them like over the horizon from land,
I was about to
so
say
that
that's the one thing that gets me about them too. I'm like, it ruins the view, to be honest.
yeah, so you can you could put them out of sight. It does cost a little bit more, obviously, because you gotta have
Go out
a
there.
power transfer cable back to land, and you have to have ships that are going out there to like service them, maintain them, etc. But you can do it. It is definitely within the realm of something that we can do even today. It just takes time and money and dedication to do so. So there's a huge amount of potential, because about 40% of the population of the US lives on or near the coast. So if we can have power supplies that are coastal based, like that would be huge, especially if we can make it so they don't impact, like migration routes or, birds or,
Mhm.
people's view.
Mhm.
um, that would be very impactful from, an energy reliability and energy security standpoint. The only kind of ding in my mind is because there's so much like pressure from the physics of it all to go big. It becomes very difficult to like decentralize and democratize.
Mhm.
Um, so that's the kind of thing that had to be done by like big companies that are like heavily invested in this stuff, and it's all stuff that it's not something that your normal person could participate in.
I also think
But
one of the
it's
biggest
still a huge amount of energy.
challenges that it has is the it's the recyclability of it and like the materials. Like I know that's one of the complaints about it is that like what do you do with the blades after it's done? And obviously we'll advance in materials. I think that is a coming frontier. But at the moment I just think like we should be thinking about these energy solutions as what can we do either after the main use of the energy is done, what can we do with it afterwards? Like, for example, on the battery side, it's like once it goes from a car, it can go to a low power situation where it doesn't need that high demand. It extends the life of it, extends the use of the materials, and then we're working on the recyclability. I think that's the hard part about wind right now. Is like I think people are like, "Hey, cool, great, wonderful wind, we get it, but all this material, are we getting the benefit out of it versus if we had a small nuke or we had a small, or a geothermal setup.
Well, yeah. The good news is that most of the material in a wind turbine is metal, like iron, and which you can just, cut it up and melt it down and use it for something else, make more wind turbines out of it. So I think there's definitely like the possibility of recycling. It's just like, are we doing it? Like is it actually happening? And yeah. So
Yeah.
okay. So I have tidal power on here, but really there's not much to say about tidal power yet, sadly. So tidal power is tapping into the movement of the tides, going in and out to generate power. It's been used for like a long time, like over 1,000 years, in places like like Rome and in Europe, and that we know about anyway. That we have good records of. Basically, they would build these tidal pools. Tide would come up, and then they would use that. When it comes out, they would use it to turn a water wheel. So that's kind of like the basic form that we've been using this in, but there's all kinds, like anything you can think of in terms of like this will move up and down with the water, like that somebody has probably thought about it to try to generate tidal power, but there's a lot of difficulties, like a surprising amount of difficulties with making like a good, solid, reliable tidal power system, because the ocean is just it's that kind of beast. It's very corrosive. There's tons of life in it, so like barnacles, buildup of biological material on your stuff. There's crazy weather, like I mean even just the tides themselves moving in and out. So yeah, there's challenges with producing something that's kind of really worthwhile, and long lasting. And this is something that's like very, very far down the road. But hypothetically, if we were to like go all in on tidal power and be like blocking not blocking but like resisting the
Redirecting.
flow of tides across like a big chunk of the planet, like that could potentially slow the rotation of the Earth. It'd be very slow, but like it's cumulative.
Wow. Yeah.
So like we have to think like, is that something that we want to get
Play
into?
with.
I don't know. Like that's above my pay grade. So yeah, we'll move on from tidal power here.
Yeah.
Because the last thing I wanted to talk about was different battery technologies. So we've talked about essentially two different types of lithium, specifically lithium battery technologies. The NMC, nickel, manganese, cobalt, and the LFP, lithium iron phosphate. But there's all kinds of different battery technologies. So there's newer stuff includes stuff like solid state batteries. So as opposed to traditional battery, which uses like a liquid media, these are like just solid. So it's like a solid like crystalline structure, like ceramic or something like that. They're super high energy density. They're longer lasting, and they're basically fireproof. So there's a lot of advantages there. But right now they're a lot harder to make and a lot harder to scale in terms of like production. There's lithium
I think that's one of the big
sulfur.
hurdles that we got to get over. Like that, I think solid state batteries, my opinion, wholly, but I think once we achieve the solid state battery, I think we'll see a huge jump in efficiency in the battery market when that happens. Like whether it be in vehicles, everything I think will change a bit more at that solid state.
Yeah.
And to your point on the scalability, it's like, yeah, that's one, the infrastructure, the manufacturing, all that, but also just purely the cost. It's like the cost of making it, I would imagine, is much higher than what we're doing right now.
Yeah. It's this. Yeah, you have to find this sweet spot of like the availability of the materials, the cost of like the most expensive thing that's in it. Like the environmental impact, the health impact, the safety, the reliability, the longevity, like all of these like moving things, and you have to find this narrow way through. Yeah. So There's lithium sulfur batteries, so they're kind of the same thing, but they use sulfur, which is super abundant, but they're more susceptible to corrosion, so there's more work to do there. There's sodium batteries, which literally use like seawater, salt water, which are related to like flow batteries, which use like a flow of liquid, like moving the liquid around as opposed to like moving electrical charges within the liquid around. Those are obviously very low fire risk because it's all in water, but they're also much lower energy density. So, there are flow batteries that are used today, but they tend to be larger and for places where you don't need a super high density of energy. There's some really cool ones. Iron air battery, which basically generate electricity from rust, like rusting, the chemical process of rusting, and they can actually reverse that process. Like, yeah, it's so you can basically you have like a bunch of like iron and you expose it to air, it rusts, and that you can generate electricity off of that. And then if you put electricity back in, you can unrust the iron and use it again and again.
Wind
So
turbines. The waste of the blades. There we go.
there you go. So they're very cheap and long lasting, but they have a low energy density and they're slow to recharge because rusting is not the fastest process around.
Indeed.
And then one that I've been gung ho on this for a while. I used to study nanoscience stuff. Graphene batteries. If we can really get our heads around how to produce them, how to use them, graphene batteries will change the world because they're super fast charging, discharge. They're extremely high density. They have a long life and very low fire risk, but we're still just trying to like figure out how to make them in any kind of reasonable scale at the moment. So yeah, and those are just sheets of carbon. Like if you take a pencil and you draw a line on a piece of paper, you've left a layer of graphene on there. But it's, obviously that's very like low quality, like disorganized, but so like producing finely made, like precise sheets of graphene to, act as your battery. Like it's been a ordeal. Yeah. So there's all kinds of different, and this is not like necessarily like a different chemistry, but there's a company out there right now, Etica AG, that is doing a liquid cooled battery, a lithium battery. So literally suspending all of the cells and everything in a liquid media that cools it. So,
Wow.
essentially eliminates the risk of thermal runaway of fires. Yeah. So there's all kinds of technologies out there. We have the ones that have been able to pass all of those hurdles. The reliability, safety, efficiency, cost. Availability. We've seen those ones kind of come out. Whether that's the LFP batteries, the NMC batteries, lead acid, whatever. Duracells, like all of those things. They came from the same kind of conceptual underpinnings, the same chemical and physical processes. They just made their way out of that labyrinth of like all of those different factors. And so we see them, but there are still plenty of, ideas and technologies that are coming along. They're coming through the pipeline, and the more we invest in our research capabilities and our R&D capabilities as a country or as states, like start funding those students. Like if you want to see cool battery technologies, like put more money into schools, like because that's and research centers, and like that's where that comes out of. And I we were talking about batteries before. I mentioned how China has been putting a lot of money toward research, and they're starting to see some really cool developments out of that. And it just seems like a shame to have the United States be kind of left behind in some ways on that, because we have a lot of brilliant people here too, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people that are very interested in, creating new technologies and, making sure they're safe and, effective and things like that. But if we're cutting funding for schools, and we're making it harder for people to do research and access funding from the federal level, like all of that is going to slow down the process for
Mm-hmm.
us.
Yeah,
Or
I think private investment might be able to combat that a little bit. And I think on the other side, it's like it's kind of embedding the mindset in everybody that we're at a point where we can think big. Like I think there's
Mhm.
times and cycles where you think big, then you refine and get it to where it's perfect, and then you think big again. And I think we had that kind of big think mindset, if you will, kind of in that first nuclear era side of like we kind of reimagined what a lot of that stuff could look like. It was like, wow, this is incredible, and there was so much excitement and wonder and innovation and wondering what if. And I think
Mhm.
we have that opportunity again now. And so I would just encourage a lot of people like just think about what is possible. I mean, even just in this conversation today, there's so many different things where I was like, wow, I didn't know that. And it continues to open the mind. And so I think, yeah, encouraging everybody to kind of think bigger about what the possibilities could be. It doesn't have to be fit. It doesn't have to fit into the box that we've always had.
Yeah.
It's a completely different box now.
Yeah, I think, for moving forward into the future, adopting kind of a yes and attitude,
Mm-hmm.
like an improv type of attitude is very can be very useful. As long as we're not turning a blind eye to, the potential hazards or the cons.
Yes.
I'll just one last thing before we wrap up here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this is relevant to all of these things that we've talked about today, and like especially the battery stuff that we've talked about before. You can and should follow the precautionary principle. So like
Mm-hmm.
try not to do any harm. With
Mm-hmm.
with new things, but you also have to keep in mind that every choice that you make, and that as a person, and also like collectively as a society, every choice has a trade-off. Every choice is a compromise in one way or another, and the pushback that we've seen, especially in like Central California, since the Moss Landing battery fire, about the safety of batteries, um, is in my mind a little misguided, because it's not really considering what the alternatives are. Because really, I mean, the alternative to battery facilities, right now, is fossil fuels. And so if you're protesting, based on limited information about like new safety developments in battery technology, if that's what you're basing your protest off of, then you are essentially advocating for a return to fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
If you're adopting this kind of reactionary attitude of like, this accident happened, I didn't like that, I want to just like
Mm-hmm.
stop everything until I can understand more.
Mm-hmm.
You're essentially advocating for a return to fossil fuels because you're not putting forth an alternative, a reasonable alternative.
Mm-hmm.
Because people aren't just gonna like cut off their power. Like it, we're that is like theoretically that is one thing we could do. We could just go back to the dark ages, like and just shut off all our power, and be like, okay, like we're done. We couldn't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we can. I think we can handle it if we're smart about it, and we we uh we as a society can learn to respect expertise again.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I feel has been really lost over the last decade or so. Is people feeling like they can't trust people who have spent their whole lives studying an issue,
Mm-hmm.
which it's really been a hamper on a lot of development, and just kind of like on a societal like psychic
Mm-hmm.
level too. Um,
Well, and we want to
so
encourage life pursuits. Like we want
yeah,
to encourage people to pursue something at a very, very deep level. I think it's so easy now to jump around and do one thing to the next, but I think some of the people that I respect the most are the ones that have been pursuing the thing for 40, 50 years. And their depth of knowledge and their wisdom and their understanding of it at a very deep level is so valuable.
yeah.
um,
They
that I
because they
think
know
it's kind of
things that you don't even
irreplaceable.
know that you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I like, and I try to, follow this too, even though I'm here, yammering on and on about, all kinds of different things. Like, I try to be very careful, about like what I come out for and come out against, because like I have kind of a, an expertise in a lot of different things, but like not as super deep as like somebody who is like a battery scientist, right? Obviously. I mean, so like I'm maybe a little bit more like hesitant on like the nuclear stuff than you and some other people, but that's just because like I've really dug into like the nuclear waste issue and like how much of a problem that is, and how long of an issue like that is. And I'm like I'm just more hesitant about it, but I'm also not using my little platform here to advocate for like a ban on nuclear power, because like I'm not an expert, like I'm not an expert in nuclear power, like, so there may be situations that I'm not aware of where these factors can be mitigated, where it can be a like an overall pro-social use case. And so yeah, I just invite everybody to to keep an open mind, to respect the people that know what they're talking about, and just recognize that everything is a compromise, and if you're advocating against something that has a lot of benefits, then you're advocating for something that maybe doesn't have as many benefits or has way more drawbacks, which is the case with the utility battery uh, resistance movement.
Well, and just for people to stay curious, like just stay
Yeah.
curious. I think as people, when you're open-minded and you're curious, there's a lot of wonderful things that start to happen, and that's the coolest part.
Yeah, absolutely. I think curiosity is one of the most powerful forces that we have as humans.
Indeed.
That's if yeah that's our
Well,
our ultimate source of energy. I think curiosity.
Indeed. Well, if those of you that are listening, if you're still with us, I know this was a longer one, but hopefully a really interesting one. It was one of the most interesting ones that I think we've done, just because it really dove into everything, and all the
Went
different
out to the
options and the mindset
frontiers
around
today.
it. Exactly, and I really enjoy that. And so we hope to obviously bring more of that. And I think we're going to get into some really interesting thing in the coming episodes. But this lays a foundation for us to work off of, that I think everybody's understanding will be really powerful in how we think about stuff going forward.
Absolutely.
John, thank you again for a wonderful episode, and we'll see you guys next time on Power to the People.
Energy is inherently a part of everything we do in our lives, but one of the least understood things.
I can see a future where there is limitless and free energy. And that's a pretty beautiful world to live in.